Mr. James Callahan, Britain's Foreign Secretary, on a 10-day tour of Africa, makes an unscheduled stop in Port Elizabeth and becomes the first British cabinet minister to make an official visit to South Africa for 15 years. His meeting with Prime Minister John Vorster was prompted by the remarkable speed of political changes in southern Africa over the last few months. Changes which have included a South African plan to end the illegal regime in Rhodesia and pave the way for African majority rule.
I'm glad the British press has got such much. Oh, I see one.
Harold Macmillan was the last British politician to visit South Africa in 1960. His visit to Dr. Verwoerd also took place at a turning point in Africa's history. His tour of the continent confirmed his view that black nationalism was a force to be reckoned with. For while there was a friendliness for Macmillan as an individual, there was evidence too that the black man's fervour to govern himself was a reality which couldn't be ignored. Macmillan observed as much in a now famous speech to the South African Parliament. "The wind of change is blowing through the continent," he said, and urged South Africa to accept black nationalism as a political fact. He carried that message throughout his tour and called the period a time of destiny for Africa. Macmillan was right. Since then, events have redrawn the African map. In 1960, Africa was a continent in turmoil as the former colonial powers rapidly dismantled their empires and new black states emerged. By the mid-60s, the colonialists had withdrawn everywhere except southern Africa, and white rule persisted only in the Portuguese territories of Angola and Mozambique, in the Republic of South Africa, and in southern Rhodesia, where no formula could be agreed between London and the colony's 200,000 whites to pave the way for independence. All these white states had to make adjustments to preserve the status quo. South Africa, for example, was forced out of the British Commonwealth. In Angola and Mozambique, black guerrilla movements grew up to try to wrest independence from Portugal by force. These armies, among them Frelimo, waged a bitter struggle against white troops sent by Lisbon. The fighting was to cost Portugal dearly in lives and money as the black commandos gradually forced the war in their favour. In Rhodesia, too, the ruling class set itself against the tenor of the times. In 1965, white Rhodesians chose to break away from Britain and live under an illegal regime rather than accept black majority rule. Conscious that Rhodesia was alone and with little support outside for its action, Premier Ian Smith tried to reassure the world about Rhodesia's internal policies.
This I would like to emphasize. We are not going reactionary. This is going to be a country which we hope is going to be worthwhile for all people to live in, whether they be black or white.
After that, the winds of political change abated, but were replaced by new influences, this time economic ones, affecting most the Republic of South Africa. During the 1960s, South Africa developed into a major industrial power, a fact clearly reflected on the busy freeways into Johannesburg and in the prosperous streets of the city itself. This rapid expansion of the economy and the rising standard of living that went with it was securely founded on one commodity which South Africa had in abundance and the rest of the world badly wanted: gold. South Africa supplied 3/4 of the world's gold, and as demand for it increased, so did the price, which has quadrupled in the last 2 years alone. The problem facing South Africa was, how could it maintain both the expansion of its economy and apartheid? In the past, blacks have not shared equally in the country's wealth, doing menial or occasionally semi-skilled jobs. But as industries developed, so has the demand for skilled labor, and there are just not enough whites to meet it. These women textile workers in central Natal went on strike 2 years ago. Their action was illegal, but also successful. Since then, their example's been followed by thousands more black Africans, including miners and dockers. This realization by blacks of their economic power took many whites by surprise. But among trade union officials and industrial relations experts, it was a development they saw as inevitable. One such trade unionist was Mrs. Harriet Bolton.
We've been predicting it for years. We've been saying for years that this will happen unless decent channels of communication were opened.
What have they gained? I mean, looking through my research cuttings, they seem to have gained very little.
Well, little if you think of it in terms of money. But I think in terms of knowing what you can do, what you can do even if you're not supposed to be allowed to do it, they've gained immensely. They've gained an immense realization of their economic strength and power.
The pressures for change were not just economic, nor were they confined to Africans. Many young whites, especially students, wanted social reforms, and their demands brought them into direct confrontation with authority. Their protests came into the open 3 years ago in a series of demonstrations in the universities, such as here in Johannesburg.
And unless you disperse immediately, I shall have to use force to disperse you.
The demonstrations might have passed off peacefully, but the authorities, unused to such open defiance, overreacted, and both Cape Town and Johannesburg saw ugly clashes between students and police. The involvement of young people on this scale in direct defiance of authority was a unique event in South Africa. One of its effects was to dilute the traditional solidarity of whites against the non-white races. White and black students began to see themselves united by youth rather than divided by color, and it wasn't long before this new alignment found an echo in government. The black leaders of the African homelands were invited to Pretoria in 1973 by Prime Minister Vorster, the first in a series of meetings to discuss the political and economic future of the homelands. If Mr. Vorster expected an easy passage, he didn't get it. The chiefs told him bluntly that they expected a fair share of the Republic's wealth, which had been created largely through the labors of their own people. At the same time, Mr. Vorster also tried to put South Africa's relations with black states on a better footing. Sooner or later, all these initiatives had to affect relations with Rhodesia. Throughout UDI, Rhodesians had come to regard Mr. Vorster as one of the few dependable props in a virtually friendless world. South Africa was the ultimate lifeline, and its support was taken for granted. Indeed, the South African Premier had even sent police contingents to fight alongside Rhodesian troops against nationalist guerrillas on Rhodesia's borders. The guerrilla war began on a small scale soon after UDI. Bands of exiled black Rhodesians operating from Zambia in the north or Mozambique in the east gave the security forces little trouble at first. But the attacks gradually became heavier and more frequent. In the past 2 years, the Rhodesian and South African security forces claim to have killed over 400 guerrillas for the loss of 50 troops. Meanwhile, white civilians in the area, such as Jim Rankin, have had to turn their farms into fortresses surrounded by high wire fences.
So this goes all the way around the compound?
All the way around. The whole garden, the veggie garden, the pool, everything is inside the enclosure here. And this is continually locked.
Yeah.
At night, the domestic compound is bathed by floodlights. A two-way radio can raise the alarm in case of attack. 5 dogs complete the family's early warning system.
Yeah. One up the spout, so forth.
Rankin also keeps his rifles loaded, and he's taught his wife how to use them and reload them. Living like this was obviously a strain, but it probably could have been possible to carry on if the situation had got no worse. But last summer, the Portuguese regime in neighboring Mozambique collapsed, and Rhodesia's long, unprotected eastern flank was exposed to further guerrilla action. Portugal's new rulers admitted they couldn't defeat the rebels in the field, so they bargained with them at the conference table. For Rhodesia, the embrace of Foreign Minister Suarez and Frelimo leader Samora Machel was more like the kiss of death. For Machel is likely to be Mozambique's president in 6 months' time, and he's said he'll support an armed struggle against Rhodesia if Mr. Smith insists on perpetuating his present regime. So the pressures have built up on Mr. Smith to negotiate. But negotiate with whom? The only black political party in Rhodesia is the ANC, the African National Council, led by Bishop Abel Muzorewa. He's a man with a reputation for moderation, but in the last year or two, he's taken the ANC into much more forceful opposition to Mr. Smith. He's in no doubt about the importance of events in Angola and Mozambique.
Well, we believe that what is happening in Angola and Mozambique, in fact, has encouraged us a lot. And when we talk about settlement, it's no more in the sense that, the kind that Smith is expecting. As Dr. Chavunduga said yesterday, it has to be an overhauling of the whole system here.
Now, the overhauling,
everything.
The overhauling that you're talking about, am I right in assuming by overhauling you mean no longer a political settlement the way Westminster sees it and the way Mr. Smith sees it, but the way maybe ZAPU and ZANU see it, an all-black Rhodesia?
Well, this has been our goal all the time, of course. And all that is happening and all that has been going on has been a goal to that, yes.
So all that's been happening between London and white Rhodesians here has been rather academic.
Well, so far it has been, unfortunately. But I'm hoping that they will begin to be more serious than they've been in the past.
The release from detention last month of Joshua Nkomo, leader of ZAPU, and the Reverend Sitoli, leader of ZANU, raised African expectations considerably. The two men were freed to attend secret talks in Lusaka, talks which produced no formal agreement on African majority rule, but which did result in the ZAPU, ZANU, and the ANC coming together in one umbrella organization. The two nationalist leaders will remain free at least while the present diplomatic moves continue. But what of Mr. Smith himself? He suddenly found himself under tremendous pressure to settle the Rhodesian issue once and for all. Pressure from all around him, from black and white, north and south. How does he explain it?
I don't know. If you are correct when you say suddenly, I think for a long time, at any rate, the South Africans have been interested in the settlement. While they've never interfered in our internal affairs, they have always, been very pleased to hear of any progress and wished me good luck. As far as the countries to the north are concerned, I believe that they have felt a settlement desirable. At any rate, those who are orientated south.
For economic reasons, maybe?
Yes, I think economic reasons are a very important reason. I believe there are other reasons as well. I think they are becoming concerned at the terrorism which is spreading in their countries as well. It masquerades there under the guise of gangsterism, I suppose, rather than terrorism. But there is a tremendous increase in lawlessness in those countries, in banditry. And I think that they are worried about this as well.
What then, Mr. Smith, are the minimum preconditions that you will accept from them for any future constitutional conference?
My plea on this occasion, and it will be in the future, will be to leave us Rhodesians to settle our own affairs amongst ourselves. I understood that they, like the South African government, were prepared to act as a catalyst to try to get the thing moving, but not to interfere in the actual terms of the agreement. This has nothing to do with people who do not live in Rhodesia. And I was led to believe, and I'm satisfied the South African government were led to believe, that this was acceptable to them. I don't believe that the British have a part to play in this.
Anymore?
No, I quite frankly believe that it's something dealing with Southern Africa. I think the British are far away. They're further away now than they've ever been. I believe, but I'm only giving you my thinking again. This is the view of the Zambians as well, and a number of the other black states around here.
Obviously, there can be no détente in Southern Africa, no peaceful coexistence that you and Mr. Foster talk about, while Rhodesia sticks out, how was it somebody described it recently, like a sore thumb?
I suppose that's a fair comment, yes. If we go on like this, then we will have to go on living as we have for about the last 10 years, and if we have to, it doesn't worry us all that much.
Does it not really worry you all that much?
We've done fairly well, you know. In fact, many Rhodesians think we've done far better than if we had not been sticking out like a sore thumb.
But there's this awful uncertainty about the future, which must be very depressing.
I don't find it uncertain or depressing, quite frankly, and I believe I share the views of the majority of Rhodesians. We're going to go on the same way. I think there are a lot of people who would like us to feel uncertain, people who are even stimulating uncertainty, but they're not being very successful. When you look at Rhodesia today, you see how confident we are, how buoyant the economy is, how people are building and putting their roots down. Other people seem to be worrying more than Rhodesians.
But you're still very isolated, Mr. Smith. And it's this isolation which may be the thing which will undo you.
Well, they're no more isolated than we have been, as I said, for the last 10 years or so.
Can we expect any more progress, immediate progress, or has the door been shut for the time being?
I don't believe the door has been shut. And if it has, I will not be responsible for shutting this. I want to make it clear, and I've said this on many occasions in the past. I believe that we must always keep doors open. We must communicate. But of course, it does take two parties or more to be successful in communication. And I can't give an undertaking as far as these people to the north are concerned. Therefore, I can't really tell you whether I think there's going to be any progress even over the next year. And if there isn't, we're quite happy to go on the way we're going on now. Thanks very much.
There are nearly 250,000 whites in Rhodesia. For the past 10 years, they've expressed overwhelming confidence in Mr. Smith and supported his refusal to grant African majority rule. But now that confidence is eroding, and the whites are leaving at the rate of 1,000 a month. There are 5.5 million blacks in Rhodesia. For the past 10 years, they've watched the pressures build. Time's been on their side, and among the politically conscious urban Africans at least, there's now the growing conviction that the birth of their state, Zimbabwe, cannot be long delayed.